how the pure soul of a child saved a family. While adults often blame others for even the most minor offenses and vehemently demand apologies, children usually take a more pragmatic approach. This is also the case in the story described here, in which a child forgives even the most severe reproaches on the part of her parents, and by a lucky twist of fate, decides to save them from a predicament. This is the story of little Ursula, who touches people with her angelic voice and will remain in our memory for a long time because of her deeds. A hurricane destroys the livelihood of the Ramirez family. When the washing machine breaks down, the television refuses to work, or the internet goes down for a few hours, we tend to forget how well off we are compared to countries like Nicaragua, where people often have to fight for their daily survival. In a small village near Ciudad Sandino, the Ramirez family lives in poor conditions and struggles to make ends meet. While Sergio works as a day laborer and tries to keep his family financially afloat, his wife, Arantxa, takes care of the apartment and the couple's 2 sons. Although not always easy, Sergio and Arantxa live a hard, but altogether modest and happy life with their offspring. One fateful day, however, the Ramirez family's familiar daily routine ended. A terrible hurricane swept over the area around Ciudad Sandino, causing massive destruction. The cyclone destroyed numerous houses and factories, leaving thousands of people homeless. Among them was Sergio's family, which was in ruins from one moment to the next. Not only was their home completely destroyed, furthermore, due to the massive destruction caused by the natural disaster, Sergio had no work left. Thus, for the time being, the Ramirez family had no choice but to seek refuge in a refugee shelter. Theft and violence dominate everyday life. In the first days, it became apparent that the life of the young family here was about to get even worse, as the accommodation provided shelter for numerous refugees struggling for survival. There should have been no question of law and order, but instead, everyday life was dominated by violence and crime. Time and again, Sergio's family became victims of theft after receiving food and items for their daily needs. It quickly became apparent to Sergio that things could not go on like this. Somehow, he managed to get in touch with his parents, who agreed to temporarily take him, his wife, and his children in. However, since the solution was not permanent, Sergio and Arantxa had no choice but to seek shelter with other family members or friends and move on every few weeks. At the same time, Sergio resumed his work as a day laborer, saving as much money as he could to finally change his family's fate for the better. After almost 2 years, he'd finally saved up enough money to build a small hut serving as his family's home. But unfortunately, the subsequent problems were short in coming. Only a short time after moving into the 4 walls of their home, it turned out that Arantxa was pregnant yet another time. There's no sign of motherly love. Usually a reason to rejoice. In the case of the Ramirez family, however, the unwanted pregnancy caused further problems, as the couple still had to make ends meet with modest financial means and could not afford another child. Since abortion was never an option, little Ursula was born just 7 months later, turning Sergio and Arantxa's lives upside down. Arantxa's character, in particular, changed significantly as a result of the unplanned child. Once a loving mother, the young woman became increasingly frustrated with her situation in life and took it out primarily on little Ursula, whom Arantxa indirectly held responsible for the family's financial problems. These became greater and greater over time because, of course, they had another mouth to feed with a newly born Ursula. While the family's 2 sons took on small side jobs such as delivering newspapers or tending neighbors' gardens, thus making their modest contribution to the family income, Ursula was of course too young to support her parents. As a result, she was increasingly perceived by Arantxa as a pure burden. Thus, the first years of Ursula's life dragged on. The little child repeatedly experienced unpleasant verbal attacks and a painful rejection by her mother. Because of her age, little Ursula could not understand her mother's behavior and spent most of the time withdrawn in her room. An unexpected talent. When Ursula reached the age of 8, her family's financial situation had not changed much. She was still living in a modest little hut and was struggling to make ends meet with her monthly income. Thus, Ursula had no choice but to do small jobs after school, a sacrifice that the little girl was only too happy to accept. Instead of complaining about her situation, Ursula diligently fulfilled her duties and began to sing while doing her work. Then, by chance, an elderly lady heard Ursula's voice and was thrilled. She approached the child and asked the little girl if she would be willing to visit her from time to time and sing serenades to her for a little extra pocket money. Little Ursula, who wanted nothing more than to be able to support her parents, agreed. However, her efforts were not to be rewarded. When she sang a few songs to the older woman, she forgot the time and came home too late. Unfortunately for her frustrated mother, this was enough to take out her frustration on Ursula one more time. "Ever since you were born, you've been nothing but trouble," she yelled at her daughter. "We could never afford you." Words that hurt Ursula deeply. The child disappears without a trace. After crying herself to sleep, the child was determined not to be a burden anymore and to do everything possible to support her parents. Sergio and Arantxa realized something was wrong when Ursula did not come home after school. The hours passed, and even when it got dark, there was no sign of their daughter far and wide. Even the neighbors who had been questioned had not seen the little girl. When Ursula remained missing for the next few days, Arantxa was not only worried about her daughter, at the same time she blamed herself heavily, realizing that she had treated Ursula more than unfairly. The two parents were delighted when a phone call reached them a few months later. Ursula had been tracked down by an acquaintance of the family in a neighboring town. Several phone calls later, the daughter's whereabouts were determined, and Sergio and Arantxa set out to bring their little girl home. When the two arrived in the neighboring town, they could not believe their eyes. Within a short time, Ursula, who was just 7 years old, managed to turn her life and that of her family around, and for the better. But what had happened? Ursula forgives her mother. After the girl realized she could earn money with her voice, she stood in the marketplace daily and sang her favorite songs. People were delighted and threw numerous coins into the little girl's hat. Then one day, a music producer, taking a walk in the city, became aware of Ursula's singing and was thrilled. When the child told him her distressing story, he decided to give the little girl a home and support her in her singing career. The producer used his contacts, and within a short time, a significant label agreed to support the talent and provided her with a lucrative record contract. From then on, Ursula, who came from a poor background, came into a lot of money. But what was all that money worth without her beloved parents? And this is where the circle closes. On the day the contract was signed, the contacts with her relatives ensured that Sergio and Arantxa could finally hold their daughter in their arms again. Arantxa in particular wept bitterly and tearfully and apologized for how she had treated Ursula. And to her amazement, Ursula immediately forgave her and could hardly wait to present her with the freshly signed record deal. As a result, Sergio's family had no more financial problems and could finally move into a bigger house in a quiet neighborhood. Thus, Ursula not only saved her family from poverty, but at the same time, the child made it clear in an impressive way that love for one's own family can be very forgiving. Even the unjust reproaches that Ursula had to listen to from her mother over the years were forgiven. Now, the question is, can you easily forgive reproaches of this kind? And do you know of any stories in which children were a valuable help to their parents? Tell us in the comments.